Officer Mercer, do not hang up. This is the White House Situation Room. The words were calm, almost ordinary, but every sound inside the precinct seemed to disappear the moment Daniel Mercer heard them. His pen stopped halfway across an arrest report. The smile he had worn only seconds earlier vanished. Around him, fluorescent lights hummed over gray desks, half-empty coffee cups, and officers finishing another long evening shift in Washington, D.C. Rain tapped softly against the windows, turning the city lights outside into blurred streaks of red and gold. Mercer tightened his grip on the receiver. "I'm sorry, who is this?" he asked. The answer came without hesitation. "The White House Situation Room. We need confirmation regarding a woman currently being held at your facility. Her name is Dr. Naomi Carter." Mercer said nothing. His eyes moved slowly toward the secured holding area at the end of the hallway. Behind that door sat the black woman he had arrested less than 90 minutes earlier for what he described as causing trouble near a restricted government building. She had not shouted. She had not threatened anyone. She had not tried to run. In fact, what irritated Mercer most was how calm she had remained. Even when he told her she was being detained, Naomi had simply looked at him and said, "Before you make this permanent, officer, verify my name." Mercer had laughed. He had heard versions of that warning before, or at least he believed he had. People became important when consequences arrived. Everyone suddenly knew somebody. Everyone had an explanation. So Mercer had ignored her request. At the station, he had entered her name into the report, described her behavior as disruptive, and told a younger officer that people needed to learn that arguing with authority had consequences. Naomi heard him from behind the secured door. She offered no response. She simply sat beneath the cold overhead light with her hands folded, watching the clock on the opposite wall. 8:47 p.m., then 8:48, then 8:49. She seemed to be waiting for something. Mercer assumed she was finally realizing that nobody was coming to rescue her. Now, with the receiver pressed against his ear, he wasn't so certain. Sergeant Rebecca Hayes looked up from her computer and noticed the color draining from his face. Captain Thomas Whitaker had just stepped from his office when Mercer raised one hand, silently asking everyone nearby to stop talking. The voice on the phone continued. "Officer Mercer, I need you to answer 3 questions clearly. Is Dr. Naomi Carter in your custody? Has she been processed? And has anyone opened or attempted to access the sealed material in her possession?" Mercer swallowed. His gaze dropped toward the black evidence pouch resting beside his paperwork. Naomi had warned him not to open it. Not angrily, not dramatically. She had simply said the material was federally protected and that verification would explain everything. Mercer had called that another attempt to cause trouble. Across the room, Hayes was already standing. "Daniel," she whispered, "who's calling?" Mercer didn't answer. For the first time that evening, the badge on his chest did not make him feel like the most powerful person in the room. Then the voice on the line asked one final question, quieter than the others. "Officer Mercer, did Dr. Carter request that you verify her identity before you detained her?" Mercer stared through the narrow window in the holding room door. Naomi Carter was already looking back at him, and suddenly he remembered exactly what she had said. Every word. 7 minutes earlier, Washington had looked almost peaceful beneath the rain. Water moved in silver lines across Pennsylvania Avenue. Headlights reflected from the pavement, and people hurried beneath umbrellas as the evening temperature settled near 50 degrees. Naomi Carter stepped from a dark sedan 2 blocks from a secured federal complex and closed the door quietly behind her. Nothing about her appearance demanded attention. She wore a charcoal coat over a simple navy business suit, carried a black leather bag, and moved with the measured confidence of someone who knew exactly where she needed to be. Her phone vibrated once. Naomi glanced at the screen. The message was brief. Briefing moved forward. "We need you inside by 7:30. She checked her watch. 7, 12, 18 minutes. Enough time, assuming everything went according to plan. Naomi slipped the phone into her coat and continued toward the security entrance. Across the street, Officer Daniel Mercer sat inside his patrol vehicle, finishing the last of his coffee. 16 years in uniform had taught him to notice movement, hesitation, anything that seemed unusual. But experience had also given him something more dangerous than caution. Certainty. Mercer had developed the habit of believing his first impression was usually the correct one. When he noticed Naomi approaching the restricted entrance, he watched longer than necessary. She paused beside a security barrier and spoke quietly with a contract guard. The guard checked a tablet, frowned, then checked it again. Naomi looked at her watch. 7:15. My clearance should already be updated, she said. Please verify Carter through the Federal Access Desk. The guard nodded and reached for his radio. It was an ordinary delay, the kind that happened every day inside Washington's layers of security. Mercer did not hear the full conversation. He saw only pieces. A woman waiting near a controlled entrance. A guard checking credentials twice. A black bag held close at her side. Then Naomi stepped several feet away to answer another call. Yes, she said softly. I am outside. There is a clearance delay. I will be there as soon as they verify it. Mercer was already getting out of his vehicle. The rain dotted his uniform as he crossed the street. Naomi ended the call when she noticed him approaching. Ma'am, Mercer said. Step away from the entrance. Naomi looked toward the guard, then back at Mercer. I am waiting for my clearance to be confirmed. I said step away. His tone changed the atmosphere immediately. The guard opened his mouth as though he intended to explain, but Mercer raised a hand. I have this. Naomi studied him for a moment. No anger, no fear, just calculation. Officer, there is nothing for you to handle. Security is verifying my access. Mercer looked at her bag. What is inside? Government material. Open it. Naomi's expression changed for the first time, not dramatically, but enough for Mercer to notice. I cannot do that. He gave a humorless smile. Then we already have a problem. Naomi glanced toward the guard again. No, officer. You have a question. Questions can be verified. Mercer stepped closer, convinced her composure was resistance rather than discipline. Name. Naomi Carter. Identification. She reached slowly into her coat and produced a credential holder, but before Mercer examined it, his radio crackled with another transmission. He looked away for only a second. When he turned back, Naomi's phone was vibrating again. She checked the screen without answering. Mercer noticed that too. Who keeps calling you? He asked. Naomi placed the phone back into her pocket. Someone who is expecting me. Mercer stared at her. Behind them, the security guard's radio suddenly came alive. A voice began speaking through the static, followed by two unmistakable words. Carter confirmed. The guard turned toward Mercer. Officer, wait. I think we have her clearance. But Mercer had already made up his mind. The guard took one step forward. Officer Mercer, the access desk just confirmed her name. Mercer barely looked at him. Confirmed what? That she is expected here. Rain gathered along the brim of Mercer's cap as he studied Naomi again, searching her face for the uncertainty he expected to find. There was none. That bothered him more than an argument would have. Expected by who? He asked. The guard hesitated. I was not given that information. I was told to verify Carter and allow the clearance process to continue. Mercer gave a short laugh. So you do not actually know who she is? Naomi remained still. He knows enough to finish doing his job. Mercer turned toward her. And you need to stop telling people how to do theirs. I asked for verification. You are standing outside a restricted federal facility with a sealed bag you refused to open, and now you are giving instructions. Naomi glanced at the security camera above the entrance. Those are not the same thing. Mercer stepped between her and the door. Maybe not to you. The guard shifted uneasily. Officer, her credential is still processing. We can wait. Another minute. No. She has already caused enough disruption. Naomi looked around at the nearly empty sidewalk. A man under a blue umbrella passed without stopping. Two government employees waited near the entrance, speaking quietly. Traffic rolled steadily through the wet intersection. Nothing had been disrupted until Mercer arrived. What disruption? Naomi asked. Mercer pointed toward the public side of the barrier. Move over there. She did not move immediately. Am I being detained? I am giving you a lawful instruction. That was not my question. His jaw tightened. Naomi recognized the shift. She had spent years in rooms where people confused calm questions with challenges to their authority. She knew what usually happened next. The person with power stopped listening and started defending the fact that they had power. Officer Mercer, she said after reading his nameplate. I am willing to cooperate with a legitimate security check. The guard has confirmed that my name is in the system. Please allow him to complete the verification. Mercer stared at her. People like you always have an explanation. The words were quiet, but the guard heard them. So did Naomi. For the first time, her eyes hardened. People like me? A long second passed. Mercer looked away. People who think rules change because they say something important. Naomi did not answer immediately. Her phone vibrated again. 7:21. 9 minutes remained before the revised briefing time. She could have ended the encounter quickly by explaining more. She could have named the office waiting for her, the officials expecting the sealed material, perhaps even the room where she was supposed to be sitting within minutes. But the information in her possession was restricted, and Mercer had not established any need to know it. More importantly, the security system was already confirming everything he needed. "I am asking you once more," Naomi said. "Let the access desk finish." Mercer shook his head. "No. You are coming with me until I figure out what you are really doing here." The guard moved closer. "Officer Mercer, I do not think that is necessary." Mercer ignored him and reached for his radio. "Dispatch, I need an identity check on Naomi Carter." Naomi closed her eyes for half a second. Not from fear, from disappointment. The answer Mercer needed was already standing 3 feet away, glowing on the guard's tablet. He simply did not trust it because it contradicted the conclusion he had reached first. The guard looked down as a new message appeared on his screen. His expression changed immediately. "Officer," he said, more urgently now. "You need to see this." Mercer did not turn. "Not now." Naomi watched him raise the radio toward his mouth. Then she looked directly at the body camera fixed to his uniform and understood something Mercer did not. From that moment forward, every choice he made was becoming part of the record. "Officer Mercer, please look at this." The guard held the tablet toward him, but Mercer kept his attention on Naomi. "I said not now." The guard lowered his voice. "Her access request has been elevated. This is not a standard visitor clearance." That should have been enough. It was not. Mercer had already decided what Naomi represented to him. A problem, a challenge, someone refusing to accept his authority without question. Changing course now would mean admitting that his first judgment might have been wrong. "Ma'am, step away from the entrance," he said. Naomi remained composed. "Am I free to leave?" Mercer paused. "You are being detained while I determine what is going on." "Then please state the reason clearly." A few people near the entrance turned toward them. Mercer noticed the attention and seemed to interpret it as another loss of control. "You are causing a disturbance." Naomi looked around. The rain whispered against the pavement. Cars passed behind them. Nobody was shouting. Nobody was blocking the entrance. The only raised voice belonged to Mercer. "What exactly have I done that constitutes a disturbance?" she asked. "You have refused instructions. I asked whether I was being detained. I requested that my identity be verified. Your security officer has now tried twice to give you that verification." The guard shifted uncomfortably. Mercer glanced toward him. "Stay out of this." Naomi's phone vibrated again inside her coat. 7:24. 6 minutes until the briefing. Mercer heard it. "Take out the phone." Naomi did not reach for it. "Why?" "Because I told you to." Her expression remained steady. "That is not a legal explanation." Something changed in Mercer's face. Not rage. Something quieter and more revealing. He had expected compliance to come automatically with the uniform. Naomi's questions forced him to explain himself. An explanation was precisely what he did not want to provide. He reached for his handcuffs. The small metallic sound made the guard straighten. "Officer Mercer, I strongly recommend waiting for your supervisor. I do not need permission to do my job." Naomi looked directly at Mercer's body camera. Her voice became slower, deliberate enough that every word would be unmistakable on the recording. "Please record that I requested identity verification. Please record that security confirmed my name. Please record that I asked for your supervisor before you detained me." Mercer stared at her for a moment. "Turn around." Naomi complied without argument. There was no struggle, no dramatic scene. Only the quiet click of handcuffs closing and the sudden silence of people who realized they were watching something that did not make sense. One of the government employees near the entrance took out his phone, not to interfere, but to note the time. 7:25. Mercer guided Naomi toward his patrol vehicle. She walked calmly. The black bag remained with the security guard. "That stays sealed," Naomi said. Mercer stopped. "You do not make that decision. The classification authority does." Mercer gave her a skeptical look. "There you go again." Naomi said nothing more. The guard stepped forward with the bag still in his hands. "Officer, I am not releasing this to you until my supervisor responds. The system specifically says restricted handling." For the first time, Mercer hesitated. Only for a second. Then his radio crackled. Dispatch had received his identity request. Stand by on Naomi Carter, the voice said. We are getting an unusual return. Mercer lifted the radio. What does that mean? Static answered first. Then the dispatcher returned. I am being told not to proceed through the normal database. Federal verification is pending. Naomi looked through the rain toward the guarded entrance. Mercer heard warning. She heard confirmation. Officer, she said quietly, you still have time to correct this. Mercer opened the rear door of the patrol vehicle. You should have thought about that before causing trouble. Naomi met his eyes. I did. Then she looked once more at the body camera on his chest. Did you? The patrol car pulled away from the federal complex at 7:27, its tires whispering across rain-darkened pavement as Washington moved around them in glowing traffic signals and blurred storefronts. Naomi sat quietly in the rear seat, watching government buildings pass beyond the window. Mercer expected questions. He expected complaints. Instead, she remained silent, and somehow that silence unsettled him more. His radio crackled before they had traveled half a mile. Unit 12, confirm status on Naomi Carter. Mercer lifted the radio. Detained pending investigation. A pause followed. Copy. Federal verification request is still active. You may want to hold before processing. Mercer frowned. I already have her in custody. Understood. I am just passing along the notice. Naomi looked toward the front seat. That was your first warning. Mercer glanced at her through the mirror. Do not start. I am keeping track. 5 minutes later, they entered the precinct parking lot. Officer Evan Brooks was standing beneath the covered entrance when Mercer arrived. Young, observant, and only 3 years into the department, Evan opened the rear door after Mercer instructed him to assist. Naomi stepped out calmly. What is the charge? Evan asked. Disorderly conduct, Mercer replied. Evan looked at Naomi, then back at Mercer. What happened? She was causing trouble outside a restricted facility and refused to cooperate. Naomi spoke evenly. The facility confirmed my name before Officer Mercer detained me. Mercer turned. That is enough. Evan hesitated. Did security request police action? Mercer did not answer directly. Get her inside. That was the second warning, though Mercer did not recognize it as one. Inside, Sergeant Rebecca Hayes sat behind the main desk reviewing evening reports. She looked up as Naomi entered. Her eyes moved from Naomi to Mercer, then to Evan. What do we have? Mercer repeated his account. Hayes listened without interrupting. Any threats? No. Property damage? No. Did she interfere with access to the building? Mercer paused. She refused instructions. Hayes leaned back slightly. That is not what I asked. The room seemed quieter. Naomi stood beside the desk, composed beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. Hayes turned to her. Ma'am, did you identify yourself? Yes. Did you provide identification? I attempted to. The security officer was already verifying my access. Hayes looked at Mercer. Daniel, what probable cause are you documenting? Disorderly conduct. Causing a disturbance. Hayes stared at him for a long moment. Be very specific in your report. Mercer gave a dismissive nod. I know how to write a report. Hayes lowered her voice. That was not advice about grammar. The third warning had arrived. Mercer ignored that one too. Naomi was taken to a secured holding room while the administrative process continued. Before the door closed, she turned toward Hayes. Sergeant, please preserve Officer Mercer's body camera footage from the moment he approached me. Hayes nodded slowly. I will. Mercer exhaled impatiently. She has been talking like this all night. Naomi looked at him. Because details matter. The door closed. Mercer returned to his desk and began typing. Subject became disruptive after being questioned near restricted property. He stopped, reconsidered, then continued. Subject repeatedly challenged lawful instructions and refused to cooperate. Across the room, Evan had opened the dispatch log. His expression tightened. Sergeant Hayes, he said quietly, you should see this. Hayes walked over. On the screen was the federal verification request associated with Naomi Carter. Most fields were blank. One line was not. Contact designated federal authority before further processing. Hayes turned toward Mercer. Daniel, stop typing. Mercer kept his hands on the keyboard. Why? Before Hayes could answer, the precinct telephone rang. Once, twice, then a third time. Hayes picked it up. Metropolitan Police, Sergeant Hayes speaking. She listened. Her posture changed. Yes, ma'am. She is here. Another pause. Hayes looked directly at Mercer. Captain Whitaker, she said, covering the receiver with one hand. I need you out here now. Captain Thomas Whitaker emerged from his office with his reading glasses still in one hand. He had heard something in Sergeant Hayes's voice that made him move faster than usual. What happened? Hayes kept the telephone against her ear. Federal liaison. They are asking about Naomi Carter. Whitaker's eyes moved immediately toward the secured holding room. Why is a federal liaison asking about someone in our custody? Mercer pushed his chair back. Probably because she has been making calls. She has been acting like she has connections since I stopped her. Hayes covered the receiver. Daniel, she has not made a single call since she arrived. Mercer went silent. Inside the holding room, Naomi sat beneath the fluorescent light with her hands resting on the metal table. A clock on the wall showed 7:43. 13 minutes late. She closed her eyes briefly, thinking not about herself, but about the briefing that had continued without her. People were waiting for information she had been carrying. Decisions had timelines. Timelines had consequences. Yet she remained composed. Panic would change nothing. Outside, Whitaker took the telephone from Hayes. Captain Whitaker speaking. He listened for nearly 20 seconds without interruption. His expression slowly changed. Yes, I understand. No, nothing has been opened. His eyes shifted toward Mercer. I will personally ensure that. Mercer stood. Captain, what is this about? Whitaker raised one finger without looking at him. The conversation ended a moment later. He placed the receiver down carefully. Where are her belongings? Mercer pointed toward the evidence area. Her phone and personal effects are logged. The sealed bag stayed at the federal building because their guard would not release it. Whitaker exhaled. That was the first piece of good news he had heard. And what exactly did she do? Mercer repeated the phrase he had already used several times. She caused a disturbance. Whitaker looked toward Evan. You reviewed the dispatch record? Yes, sir. Was there a complaint from the facility? Evan hesitated. I cannot find one. Did anyone request her removal? Not in the log. Whitaker turned back to Mercer, then described the disturbance without using the word disturbance. The question landed heavily. Mercer opened his mouth, but nothing immediate came out. Inside the holding room, Naomi could hear only fragments through the door. She looked down at her wrists where faint pressure marks remained from the handcuffs. They would disappear. The record would not. That was why she had spoken so carefully near the body camera. She had learned long ago that dignity sometimes looked like silence, but silence did not mean surrender. Hayes entered several minutes later carrying a bottle of water. She placed it on the table. Dr. Carter, I need to ask you something. Did Officer Mercer give you a reason for taking you into custody beyond saying you were causing trouble? No. Did you refuse to identify yourself? No. Did security verify your name while he was present? Naomi met her eyes. Yes. More than once. Hayes nodded, but Naomi noticed the concern behind her professional expression. Thank you. As Hayes turned toward the door, Naomi spoke again. Sergeant. Hayes stopped. Please make sure the original body camera file is preserved, not merely the incident report. Hayes looked back. Why do you keep emphasizing the recording? Naomi's answer was quiet. Because reports describe what people remember. Recordings preserve what they chose. Hayes stood still for a moment, then nodded. When she returned to the main room, Mercer was editing his report. One sentence disappeared. Another replaced it. Subject became increasingly uncooperative. Evan watched from several feet away. Officer Mercer, he said, the body camera upload has already started. Mercer's fingers stopped above the keyboard. Then the telephone rang again. This time the sound seemed louder. Hayes answered. She listened, straightened, and slowly held the receiver toward Mercer. Daniel, she said. This call is for you. Officer Mercer, do not hang up. This is the White House Situation Room. Mercer froze with the receiver against his ear. The sentence was almost identical to the one that would replay in his mind long after that night was over. Captain Whitaker stopped beside Sergeant Hayes. Evan Brooks stared from across the room. Even the ordinary sounds of the precinct seemed to fade beneath the low hum of fluorescent lights. Mercer swallowed. I am listening. The voice on the line remained controlled and professional. We need immediate confirmation regarding Dr. Naomi Carter. Is she currently in your custody? Mercer looked toward the holding room. Yes. Has she been processed? I am completing the report. A pause. Has anyone opened, copied, photographed or attempted to access the sealed government material in her possession? No. The material remained with security at the federal facility. Another pause followed, shorter this time. Good. Now I need you to answer carefully. Did Dr. Carter request identity verification before you detained her? Mercer felt every pair of eyes in the room settle on him. She identified herself. That was not the question. Mercer shifted his weight. Yes. She requested verification. Did security personnel tell you that her name had been confirmed? Mercer glanced at Hayes. Her expression gave him nowhere to hide. Yes. The voice remained calm. Did your dispatcher subsequently advise you that federal verification was pending? Yes. And you continued with the detention? Mercer stared at the report on his computer screen. Subject became increasingly uncooperative. The sentence suddenly looked different. Smaller. Weaker. Yes. Captain Whitaker slowly removed his glasses. Mercer finally asked the question that had been growing inside him since the first call. Who exactly is Dr. Carter? Silence held for a moment. Then the answer came. Naomi Carter was a senior national security advisor assigned to an interagency team supporting a time-sensitive White House security briefing. Her presence at the federal complex had been authorized. Her access had been legitimate. The sealed material had been protected because it contained information restricted to officials with the appropriate clearance. Mercer lowered himself into his chair. He had imagined Naomi's refusal to discuss the bag as suspicious. In reality, she had been following the rules more carefully than he had. Her detention interrupted a scheduled national security briefing. The caller continued. That matter is being addressed through appropriate channels. Your responsibility now is to preserve every record connected to this incident and follow your chain of command. No threats. No dramatic demands. Somehow, that made the words heavier. Understood, Mercer said. The call ended. Nobody spoke immediately. Then Whitaker turned toward Hayes. Preserve the dispatch logs, body camera footage, security communications, and the original report history. Mercer looked up. Captain, I made a judgment call. Whitaker's expression remained unreadable. Then the record will show us how you made it. Hayes walked to the holding room and opened the door. Naomi looked at the clock before looking at her. 7:58. Hayes spoke gently. Dr. Carter, please come with me. Naomi stepped into the main room. Mercer stood automatically. For the first time, he looked at her without the certainty he had carried outside the federal complex. He seemed to expect anger, perhaps satisfaction. Naomi gave him neither. Dr. Carter, Whitaker said, we have received federal confirmation of your identity and assignment. Naomi nodded once. Then you also know I was expected somewhere else. Yes, ma'am. Mercer finally found his voice. You could have told me who you were. Naomi turned toward him. The room became still again. I told you my name. I gave you identification. Security confirmed my clearance. Your dispatcher warned you. Your sergeant questioned the basis for the detention. She paused. How many more answers did you need before you were willing to hear one? Mercer had none. Naomi looked toward his body camera docking station, where the upload indicator continued blinking. And now, she said quietly, the question is not whether you know who I am. The question is whether the recording shows that it ever should have mattered. Captain Whitaker did not answer immediately. He looked toward the body camera docking station, then at the report still glowing on Mercer's monitor. Evan, is the upload complete? Almost, sir. A progress bar moved slowly across the screen. Mercer stood beside his desk with his arms lowered at his sides, watching as the certainty he had carried all evening gave way to something far less comfortable. Documentation. Hayes retrieved Naomi's personal belongings and placed them carefully on the counter. Her phone immediately illuminated with missed notifications, but Naomi did not touch it. She kept her attention on the people in the room. I want the recording reviewed before anyone decides what happened, she said. Whitaker nodded. Agreed. Several minutes later, Evan opened the preserved footage. Rain filled the speakers first, followed by traffic and the distant sound of the security entrance. Then Mercer's voice. Step away from the entrance. Naomi's reply followed, calm and unmistakable. I am waiting for my clearance to be confirmed. Nobody spoke as the recording continued. They heard the guard explain that Naomi was expected. They heard him say her access request had been elevated. They heard Naomi ask whether she was being detained. Then came the moment that changed the temperature in the room. People like you always have an explanation. Hayes slowly turned toward Mercer. He stared at the screen. That is not what I meant. Naomi said nothing. The footage did not argue with him. It simply continued. The guard warned him again. Naomi requested a supervisor. She asked for verification. She identified herself. She remained composed. Then her voice came through the speaker with deliberate clarity. Please record that I requested identity verification. Please record that security confirmed my name. Please record that I asked for your supervisor before you detained me. Whitaker stopped the playback. Silence. Mercer looked toward Naomi. I thought you were challenging my authority. Naomi held his gaze. I was asking you to explain it. Whitaker resumed the footage. Dispatch warned Mercer that federal verification was pending. Naomi told him he still had time to correct the situation. Then Mercer answered with the words that now sounded very different inside the precinct. You should have thought about that before causing trouble. Evan looked down at the written report. Sir, he said quietly. The report says she became increasingly uncooperative. Whitaker looked at the screen, then at Mercer. Where? Mercer did not answer. Show me, Whitaker said. Show me the moment that sentence describes. The recording continued for another minute. There was no such moment. Naomi had asked questions. She had requested verification. She had complied with the detention. Whitaker closed the report window without saving Mercer's latest edits. Preserve the revision history too. Mercer finally looked at Naomi. I made a mistake. Naomi's expression remained controlled. A mistake is taking the wrong exit on Interstate 95. You were given information repeatedly, and every time it contradicted your assumption, you treated the information as the problem. Mercer lowered his eyes. Naomi continued, her voice quieter now. The call from the White House did not suddenly make me deserving of fair treatment. My job title did not make your decision wrong. She looked toward the paused image on the monitor, where rain glistened beneath the federal building lights. It was wrong before you knew where I worked. Nobody interrupted. Tomorrow, Naomi said, someone without my clearance could stand where I stood. Someone without a federal liaison. Someone without a situation room asking where they are. She turned back to Mercer. What happens to that person? The question settled over the precinct heavier than any accusation. Mercer had spent the evening asking who Naomi Carter was. Now he understood that the more important question had been there from the beginning. Why had he believed he needed to know who she was before deciding how she deserved to be treated? By 9:15 that evening, the rain had weakened to a mist, but inside the precinct the questions were only beginning. Captain Whitaker ordered. Every record connected to Naomi Carter's detention preserved exactly as it existed. Dispatch logs, body camera footage, security communications, report revisions, timestamps, and radio traffic. Mercer was removed from street duty pending formal review. There was no shouting, no public spectacle, just procedure, the same word Mercer had relied on earlier, now moving in a direction he had never expected. Naomi stood near the front desk with her coat folded over one arm, while Sergeant Hayes completed the release documentation. Her phone had been returned, and several officials were waiting for her response, but she made one request before leaving. Do not review, only tonight. Whitaker looked at her. What do you mean? If this was truly an isolated mistake, the records will show that. If it was not, the records will show that too. 3 days later, the department's internal review expanded. Investigators found earlier complaints involving Mercer. Different streets, different names, different circumstances. Yet several accounts carried an uncomfortable similarity. Black residents described being treated as suspicious before Mercer had established what they had actually done. Some complaints had been closed because evidence was limited. Others had been explained as misunderstandings. This time, there was a complete recording, and once investigators knew what pattern to examine, old reports began to read differently. Evan Brooks provided a statement about the warnings Mercer had received that evening. The federal security guard submitted his communication log. Sergeant Hayes documented the moment she questioned the legal basis for the detention. Nobody needed to exaggerate anything. The facts were enough. Weeks later, Naomi returned to the precinct, not as someone seeking revenge, but as part of a broader accountability review requested after the incident. Mercer was no longer working patrol, while disciplinary proceedings continued. When he entered the conference room, he looked different without the confidence that had once filled every answer. Naomi sat across from him. Between them rested a printed transcript of the body camera recording. I owe you an apology, Mercer said. Naomi studied him for several seconds. You do? He nodded. I saw something that was not there. No, Naomi replied quietly. You saw what you expected to see. That is different. Mercer lowered his eyes. Naomi continued. You thought my calmness was defiance. You thought questions were disrespect. You were given facts, but the facts had to compete with an assumption you had already made about me. Mercer did not defend himself this time. I cannot change that night. No, Naomi said. But you can decide whether you understand why it happened. Outside the conference room, the precinct continued its ordinary rhythm. Telephones rang. Officers crossed the hallway. Reports were filed. That ordinary sound mattered because injustice rarely announced itself with dramatic music. Sometimes it entered through assumptions so familiar that nobody questioned them until a record forced everyone to look again. Before Naomi left, Evan met her near the entrance. Can I ask you something? He said. That night, when you knew who would eventually call, why did you stay so calm? Naomi looked through the glass doors at the city beyond them. Because I knew someone would call for me. She paused. What bothered me was thinking about the people nobody calls for. Months later, new supervisory review procedures were introduced for questionable detentions, and previously closed complaints received additional scrutiny. Naomi never considered herself the reason. The recordings were the reason. The witnesses were the reason. People willing to examine uncomfortable facts were the reason. The White House call had changed one night for Naomi Carter, but the truth preserved in that precinct changed what happened afterward. And in the end, justice was never about how powerful the woman behind the locked door turned out to be. It was about finally asking why anyone needed her to be powerful before they listened.